Hey Algebra 1, I'm going to go over completing the square for this video. This is what we went over for Monday for Algebra 1. Okay, so let's take a look here. So we have this equation, this x squared plus 6x minus 3, and we want to find the zeros. So typically if an equation like this, you're going to want to use your x, right? So let's throw in the numbers and see what happens. So I put negative 3 here, 6 here. And let's see, what numbers multiply to 3? Well, 3 and 1 do, and there's nothing else. But can I add 3 and 1 to make 6? No, you can't. There's nothing that's going to add together to make that. So factoring is not going to work in this case. So what are you going to do? Well, before we get to that question, let's review how to solve these equations. Okay, so to solve these, remember if you have parentheses, squared, and then you have equals a number, you're going to square root both sides. And then the square rooting this gets rid of our parentheses. And then if we take the square root of this, it's 5, but don't forget plus and minus. And then we're going to add 3 to this side and add 3 to this side. Those cancel out. First answer will be plus 5, or positive 5 plus 3, which is 8. And the next answer will be negative 5 plus 3, which is negative 2. Okay? So we remember how to do those. So how are we going to solve this one up here? Well, we could use the quadratic formula. That would work. But there is another way. Another way you might find easier. Okay, so let's go down to this section down here. Now let's go over how we might use this. Now if you read the instructions here, it says now that you've solved x, for examples 1 through 3, and we only did 1 just because of the sake of time, let's re-examine the equation x squared plus 6x minus 3. Now how can you use the box method? How can you use the box method to still get an answer? When you do this, think about the shape of the box and how we can manipulate it so that we can still figure out the zeros. Okay, well, let's take that equation and write it down. So we have y equals x squared plus 6x minus 3. Okay, well, using the completing square method, here's the steps you want to do. First of all, think about it. We tried the x, right? And we put the 6 on the bottom, the negative 3 on the top, and it didn't work. It didn't work because the 6 is not the number that we want there. Okay? I'm sorry, actually the 6 is fine. The 3 is not the number we want there. But what if it were 9? Well, then 3 times 3 equals 9, and 3 plus 3 equals 6. Well, that would work, right? So this method involves how do we get this number so that we can solve this using factoring. Okay, so what you're going to do first is like any or most of our problems, we want to set it equal to 0. So instead of y, let's put a 0. And now what we want to do is we want to isolate these x variables, and we want to get rid of this last term, which doesn't help us, because remember that negative 3 doesn't help us solve. So let's add 3 to both sides to remove it from the right side. Now we'll have 3 here, and then x squared plus 6x. Okay? So now, after you've done that, after you've removed this last number from the right side, or the side where all your terms are at, you're going to do a box. So draw a box like we've always done, and a 2 by 2 box, and you're going to put x squared on the top left, like we usually do, that first term. But here's where it's a little different. So now, you want to look at the middle number, and you're going to take half of that number. And half of 6 is 3. Or half of 6x is 3x. and you're going to put that 3x here and here. Okay. Now, you're not going to fill in this last box. You're going to leave it empty because that's the last step. So now, what times what equals x squared? Well, it'll be x times x. And then x times what equals 3x? Well, that's 3. And then x times what equals 3x again? 3. And notice how they're the same. All right. So now, fill in the rest. Well, this is 3, and this is 3, so 3 times 3 is 9. So then our last number will be 9. And then what do you do with that 9? Let's actually use a different color. It will be 9. Okay, so what are you going to do with that 9? You're going to take that 9 and add it to both sides of your equation. Sorry, excuse me. Now, let's add everything up. Well, we have 9 plus 3 here. And remember, we want to factor this, because ultimately what we want is we want it to look like this type of problem. Because then we could just take the square root of both sides. Well, if I get the factors of this, which are x plus 3 and x plus 3, I can just write them in. So again, x plus 3 and x plus 3, those are going to go down there. So now x plus 3 times x plus 3. We already found the factors by doing this box here of x squared plus 6x plus 9. But we could also write that a different way. We can kind of reduce it and make it a little bit simpler. Because x plus 3 and x plus 3, or basically x plus 3 written twice, is the same thing as x plus 3 squared. Now, it looks like this problem up here. And now we can solve it the same way. Take the square root of both sides. Okay. And let's move over a little bit. And we'll go here. If I take the square root of 12, well, that doesn't really come out to a perfect number or a whole number, so I'll just leave it as square root of 12. And don't forget your plus and minus. And we square root the x plus 3, so that means the parentheses will go away. And then I'll subtract 3 from both sides. That 3 goes away. And now we'll get our answer. First one is going to be square root of 12 minus 3. And the second answer will be negative square root of 12 minus 3. And there's our answer. And we could also write that out as a decimal. So let's pull out our calculator. Okay, and our first answer is going to be the square root of 12 minus 3. And that's going to give us 0.464, and I want to round to the nearest thousandth, which is 3 places after the decimal. So we'll stop at the 4, and we'll look at this one. That doesn't change the 4, so it's just 0.464. 0.464. Okay, now let's look at our, let's look at the next one. So now we'll do the same thing, and we're going to do a negative. So negative square root of 12 minus 3. And we get negative 6.464, and the same last 3 decimals. So negative 6.464. Okay? So now, let's look at another example. Okay, so again, first step is that we want to make this y into a 0. Make everything equal 0. And then we're going to get rid of the last number, or move it away from the right side. Add 1 here, add 1 here. So now we'll have all of this, 0 plus 1 equals x squared plus 4x. And once we add or subtract or move that number here, then we'll make our box. Okay, then the first number here will be x squared. Comes from here. And then we want to look at the middle number, this 4x again, and take half of that. and that goes here. So 2x. Half of 4x is 2x. And now we want to start filling in our table, or our box. And remember, don't write in the last number until the last step. So now what times what equals x squared? Well, we know that's x times x. And x times what equals 2x? 2. X times what equals 2x again? Also 2. The same. So now fill in the last step of the table. 2 times 2 is 4. And then add that same 4 to both sides of your equation. Okay, now add to both sides because I'm completing the square by figuring out what's going to make this side work. Because remember, if I do the x with the original equation, this negative 1 doesn't allow it to work. So if I find the 4, it does work now. Okay, so now add both sides, or add the left side, I should say. You get 5. And then x squared plus 4x plus 4, we want to factor that. Well, again, we already know that factor. We already know those factors. They're right here. Okay, so if it's x plus 2 times x plus 2, that's the same thing as x plus 2 squared. Now we can just solve the steps. Or do like we did before, do the square root. Square root of 5, square root of x plus 2 squared. Well, it's plus or minus square root of 5 because we can't really take the square root of 5 and get a whole number. And then the parentheses go away on this side. And we want to get rid of that 2, so we'll subtract 2 from both sides. And our first answer is going to be square root of 5 minus 2, and then negative square root of 5 minus 2. Okay, and then you can find the decimal answers if you'd like. Okay, so that's it. If you need more help, come and see me. All right, bye.